Welcome to our very first episode of Bird Banter. This is where I get to sit down with people I admire and respect in bird conservation and have real conversations about their work. We'll talk about their experience, what's worked, what hasn't, and what we've learned along the way. So today I'm joined by Jenn Lodi-Smith, a personality development psychologist who is the founder and director of the Spark Bird Project, a community science initiative that collects and shares people's birding spark stories to better understand how and why we fall in love with birds. So, welcome, Jenn.
Thank you so much for having me on, Paul. And it's such a pleasure to be able to kick this off with you. And I'm excited to see where the series goes and hear the other conversations as well. And excited to talk to you today.
Excellent. Well, we'll get right into it. We've got a series of questions that I'm going to throw your way, and really interested to hear your answers so we can learn all about the Sparkbird project. So,
Awesome.
for people who are new to your work, how do you describe the Sparkbird project?
Yeah, the Sparkbird Project is really about collecting, celebrating, sharing, and then learning from the stories of how people fall in love with birds. And along the way, we ask a bunch of other social science questions. I'm a social scientist by training. I've been studying people and their lives over time and how we come to understand who we are for over 20 years. And so bringing those tools to ask those important questions about birders. What's the spark, certainly, but also what are the individual differences in who we are as birders? How do we change over time? The benefits of birding, the challenges in birding, and how we overcome those and how we really thrive in our birding community.
So, what first drew you to this idea of collecting people's spark bird stories?
Yeah, this is such a great question. I love to tell this story. So I was not a birder for most of my life. Birds were around me. My mom is a retired veterinarian. We fed the birds. I knew my basic birds. There were certainly, I can look back and see a few near misses where I was certainly very bird curious at
Mm.
certain times in my life, but didn't quite have that next step of someone to show me how to use my binoculars properly or help me with identifications, get me really moving along with a basic checklist and making it more formal.
Mm.
And so years went by with sort of bird curiosity, but not really investing in birds as an important part of my own identity. And then my daughter was born, and her spark bird story was I was born loving birds. I don't remember a time I didn't love birds. And by the time she was verbal, it became very clear that birds was like her thing. That was her thing. And there's plenty of other interests, but birds in particular was just so exciting to her. And I happen to have a colleague who worked upstairs from me and then in the office next to me who's an ornithologist. Her name is Sarah Morris. She's the current president of the American Ornithological Society. And she happened to be the ornithologist who worked on my campus. And through some conversations after some boring meetings, she told us, all
Mm.
right, here's some things you got to do. She started us with some basic coloring books, the Peterson coloring book type things when Maisie was younger. And then as she gets older, if this interest continues, do this, do this, do this. We got out migratory bird banding. We learned to use our binoculars. And she told us go to Hog Island Audubon Camp. And Hog Island is this wonderful camp off the coast of Maine, and they have programs for adults, they have programs for teens, and they have programs for families.
Wow.
And so we went as soon as Maisie was old enough. We took my daughter, we took my older kiddo, we took my husband and me. And we all went out to bird camp. And I was waiting for the puffin boat and looked at the person standing next to me, who was the director of the camp at the time, and said, I like your tattoos. And she said, thanks, they're my spark bird. I had never heard the term before. I just casual conversation said, what's a spark bird? And she told me, and I was captivated. I've been studying people's stories, how they come to understand who they are for over 20 years. And here was this community that had come to mean so much to our family that had an existing narrative of how they fell in love with birds. And that was fascinating to me as an academic, as an individual. And we went off on the puffin boat. We had an amazing time on the puffin boat. We saw so many puffins on Eastern Egg Rock. It was wonderful. But throughout the week, this idea just kept sitting with me.
Mm.
I study how people come to be who they are. I want to know what birders are saying about how they come to know who they are in their birding identity. And so I went to go read these stories, and I was shocked that there wasn't a place where I could read these stories, where I could learn from them.
Mhm.
I could access a handful of stories from folks who had made it enough to publish their memoirs. There are some great episodes of Bird Note where there are some, a handful again of stories, a few, blogs and podcasts here and there where they might be a part of what's being asked, but there wasn't a systematic way of curating these stories. And so the project really started as a way to curate those stories for our birding community as a whole, not just the privileged folks who make it enough to be able to share their stories. So, really share every birder's story and then learn from those stories, learn the different themes in the stories, where we can find common points, where we find differences in the stories, and then go from there, ask more questions about who birders are and what they do.
Wow. Wow. So we may be repeating a few things here, but
Great.
would you share your own spark bird moment?
I don't really feel like I have a spark bird moment. And this is one of the things that I've learned from a number of spark birders is that while there is this sort of quintessential spark bird moment of you are a sort of, and this is the very like Petersonian story of Roger Tory Peterson, was this young person out in nature, sees an amazing bird, the northern flicker, and his life is changed forever. And so, yes, some people have that very clear, very distinct one transformative moment in time. Other people have a slow burn. Other people, like
Mm.
me, don't have spark birds, they have spark people. And so I really say that my daughter Maisie and my older kiddo Sam and my friend Sarah, the ornithologist, really are the people who brought birds to my life. And so they're my spark people. And we have dozens and dozens of spark people stories in the 400 stories that we have in the project so far.
Wow, I love that. That's
I do too.
awesome.
and
Uh,
and it's so important because you could be anybody's spark person.
yeah.
Get that bird curious person out there, and that can be you. And so that's really an exciting finding from the project.
So after reading so many stories, what have you noticed? Are there any themes that stand out or that surprise you?
Yeah, for sure. I think things that really stand out. So we're at a little over 400 stories right now when we're recording this. More stories are coming in all the time. Really encourage people to share their stories. The biggest common thread in the stories that folks have shared so far is the interpersonal connections.
Mm.
So sometimes it is a very explicit, I have a spark person, but a lot of the times it's not necessarily that. It is a friend or a family member who gets them out in this moment and they see something special and unique and different for the first time. So it's the interpersonal connection of having someone to share this experience with, and that moment is created by someone else. But it's also that the specialness of the moment. The stories are incredibly rich and vivid. They're positive, and that moment is transformative and memorable in a way that is distinct from their other experiences.
Right. Right.
Um, Other really important themes are having access to community, so finding community of other birders, having access to resources, optics, feeders, field guides. Those are all important parts of what's happening in a sparkbird experience. one of the things that was surprising to me, and that in hindsight is more telling about me than Sparkbird stories, is the number of stories that where sound is the key thing. And so someone is hearing a sound that is interesting to them. That's what sparks their curiosity. They start looking around, they start wondering, what is that noise up in the tree? What is that bird that's waking me up at 4 a.m. every morning? And that noise gets them curious and that draws them in. I'm not a particularly auditory person myself. I've really had to work on that aspect of my birding. But for more auditory people who pay more attention to that in their environment, that's really been a key piece for a lot of the spark stories as well. And just something that was surprising to me because of my own biases coming in. And that's part of what's so great about being able to read every one of those stories is an evolution of my own understanding of what these experiences are like. And then by sharing those with other folks, being able to see the huge variability and how these wonderful experiences happen.
Wow. I know for me, I've always been an outdoors person, always a nature person since I was a kid. I was the kid who brought home the stray cats, the injured birds, field mice, caught snakes, whatever. Um, I My identity abilities for birding, it's gotten better. However, um, one of the things that I'm big on now is Merlin. Merlin's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic thing, a fantastic app for me to identify birds, especially when traveling. Um,
Yes,
that's been a big one for me, and I don't know, it's added to my appreciation of birding because
yes.
where I may not be able to know a call or identify a call, it's so great to just throw that open and be able to get that instant information.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think we see that in the stories. We see that
yeah,
in those, especially now that we have the audio identification feature in
right.
Merlin to be able to use. The travel that's gold for us when we are bored sitting around, waiting for a doctor's appointment, or when we're getting ready for a trip. We travel the world as a family. It used to be that we would just sort of pick a random country and see what birds were there
Wow.
as an aspect of curiosity. Now we're gearing up for a trip to Costa Rica. And so we're studying hard,
Nice.
being able to specify, okay, this is the time that we're going to be, this is the region that we're going to be, is helps us pare down the information that we need to learn into a somewhat more manageable chunk. Yeah, it's such
Now,
a
when
great thing.
you're hearing stories from people of all ages,
Yep.
it must be quite interesting to have a young adult or even a child's perspective versus that of an adult
Yes.
with their Sparkbird stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a developmentalist, I love that. So I've been
Mm,
studying identity development across the lifespan for 25 years now. And our youngest participant is 8, or was 8 when she shared the story
right.
at the time. And our oldest participant just the other day is 90 years old. And so that
Wow.
range of people who are sharing their stories is phenomenal. The other thing that's really fascinating as a developmentalist is that the range of when these experiences are happening
Mhm.
range from 0, like my daughter, I was born
Right.
that way, to 87.
That's incredible.
And these are experiences that are happening in childhood. They're experiences that are happening in a high school class, in a
Yeah.
college class. They're experiences that are happening in midlife when out on vacation or looking for something new to try. They're experiences that are happening in retirement. And one of my favorite stories is a guy who's enjoying his cup of coffee day after day in his new retirement lifestyle, and a kingfisher keeps coming by every morning at the same time. And he's noticing that because he's slowing down his pace of his work life and able to notice the things around him. And so we have all of these different avenues, all of these different times and moments. And yet there's this same kernel of a growing and broadening awareness of what's around us and appreciation of that.
And we really know during COVID that we couldn't really do anything except go outside.
Yeah,
And there was a surge in people getting back to the basics, back to nature. Um, well, I think every municipality, every city in the world sort of experienced this where bird feeders and bird seeds sold out almost immediately.
absolutely.
Bikes sold out immediately. There was a lot of
Mhm.
this sort of these basic things that people were going back to. Um, we saw a major surge in people wanting to treat glass
Yeah,
because all of a sudden it was right during spring migration.
yes,
People were now at home
yes.
because prior to that, you're away 8 to 12 hours a day. You could have a strike, you wouldn't even know. So it's
Yep,
amazing how um, outside influences have a big bearing on all of these things too. Um,
absolutely.
um, I'm sure a lot of people talk about how birding becomes part of who they are.
Yes.
From your perspective, what makes that connection so strong?
Ooh, that's a wonderful question. I think there are a few themes that I see in that. One is mastery and curiosity.
Mm,
So, for some people, it is a license to be curious
mm,
and to learn in a way that our society doesn't always give us space to. Uh,
right.
we we don't privilege curiosity and wonder and joy and discovery in the natural world in our sort of day-to-day basic culture. And birding and the nature community just in general provides a space for that, provides a space for you to be able to
Mm,
go out and figure out what's around you and discover what is around you and notice and broaden beyond yourself. And so that really speaks in many ways to our need to connect beyond us, our need to connect to other people, the community connections
mm.
that can come, those interpersonal connections that can come both in the moment and after you discover birds and find community there. I think the other really key piece for many people is the the quieting that comes with noticing. So I think for some people it is and I want to learn this one, and I want to learn this one, and I want to learn
Right.
this one, and that sort of very active approach, curiosity, keeping the list, doing the things. For other people, it is a quieting, it is a sitting back, it is a noticing, it is the stillness that comes to what we would call in psychology the default network of the brain. It's sometimes very, very busy and it's doing things. And yet, when we shift our awareness to noticing the world around us, to noticing the birds, there's a stillness that can come for some people in that space. And so it varies person by person, of course, as a personality developmentalist, that's what I would say. But those seem to be the two key themes. And what's really interesting in we don't have the longitudinal data yet in the study. We do have a longitudinal component where we follow up with our participants annually, and so long term we'll be able to build this. But just reading memoirs of birders, there is often this trajectory from this eager excitement and discovery and gonna learn this one and gonna learn this one, gonna learn this one. And then often a shifting and a quieting to an appreciation of the moment and being in stillness and savoring a single bird.
One of the questions, you've been very intentional about hearing stories from a wide range of people. What have you learned about who gets access to birding and who doesn't?
Yeah, this is such an important point and really part of what I feel drawn to in this work. I had been looking for a way to give back to the birding community and
Right.
um, volunteering at bird banding stations and at wildlife rehab and removing invasive species and all of that. And it didn't feel, while very fulfilling and meaningful and interesting and fun, it didn't feel like I was fully using my skills. And that's part of why the Sparkbird project was so meaningful, and particularly what has brought it to be such a central part of my own academic and personal identity is being able to give back to the birding community and do that in a way that raises up EDI work in this time where so much of that is very much under attack. I have the privilege of being a full professor, of being post tenure, post promotion, post all the things. I sort of checked all of the boxes of what I was supposed to do career wise, and now this project allows me to really try to be thoughtful, be slow in my science, to really listen and bring in the voices wherever I can, to listen to the stories that need to and should be told, and
Mm,
help others hear them as well. And a lot of that started in areas where my own identity exists. So, with Birdability and the great
right.
work that they are doing there, I shared some of my own experiences about moving through grief. A lot of my experiences becoming a birder were also as I lived with chronic pain and continue to recover from surgery to address that chronic pain. And that will always be with me, to some degree. And that, being part of my own identity has helped me feel very comfortable connecting with that community, working with the Birdability captains to adapt the existing measures. My own research in studying autism in later adulthood
Mm.
helped me be very thoughtful in engaging with the neurodiverse community and listening and adapting the survey platform for their needs. My experiences as the parent of a queer birder have helped me really be able to and thoughtful about connecting with the queer birding community. I'm particularly proud of the fact that we have 12% of our sample identify in gender beyond a traditional binary term, and that our data capture systems allow us to do that. It's just an open-ended question for gender, and some scripts that I developed with students years ago allow us to code that in a very nimble way that allows people to be themselves in our survey platform. Where we can do more are areas outside of my own identity. So I am a white, middle aged, upper middle class cis woman. And so right now we are just starting, and I'm really excited about this, outreaching to the BIPOC birding community, creating some incentives throughout the 2026 year as I work to broaden nationally and internationally, seeking funding for translation work so that we can
Oh,
reach birders who where English is not a primary language or a language that they're comfortable writing a whole story in. So these are really the next steps for the project, but doing that in a slow, thoughtful way where I am not parachuting into the community and instead am listening, and partnering, and if as project needs to adapt to adjust to certain communities or important questions that need to be asked within certain communities, having the nimbleness to do that because of the ways that the underlying tools work and my own positions.
wow, wow, fantastic.
It's exciting work.
It is like it's very purposeful work. And one thing you just mentioned in that was that resonated with me is grief. Um, I lost my dad 3 years ago this past November, and my dad and I did a lot of nature sort of oriented things. And I know this may sound strange, but it's like all of a sudden I was started to be visited by a red-tailed hawk in our neighborhood.
Mm.
And it has had a profound effect on me. I said that's a dad nod. Whenever I see a
Yeah.
raptor now, it's like my dad sort of presenting himself or, being there, which I know can sound sort of out there, but it's something I hang on um, to manage my grief. Um,
I, yeah, I love that you say that. And uh, it's also one of the things that surprises me is the number of people who have approached me to tell me stories
mhm,
like that. Not necessarily in the survey platform. There are a
right.
few in the stories there, but going beyond that and in individual conversations, the red-tailed hawk is a common one, actually,
Mhm. Oh, really?
in these stories, which is really, I think, very, very fascinating. Cardinals as well
Yes.
are present. And I have started very quietly sharing. I like I was sort of like hesitant to see the mysticism and
Mhm,
of what I might typically express. But my dad and I were also incredibly close,
mhm,
sharing nature together, especially when I was little. We hiked the Appalachian Trail together, and he loved going to bike and see the ospreys that lived near him. And
wow,
he had been getting very excited about some screech owls that lived near his house right before his health declined. And he was also someone who simply very enthusiastically supported my research and me and what I did. And he the idea for this project came about 6 months after he died, and
mhm,
he never got to know about it, but he would have loved it. And I often find resonance with him and knowing that he would have been excited and feeling like as close as I ever have felt, oh, maybe there's something there.
mhm.
I feel that in sort of nudges with this project.
Well,
And
I'm a firm believer he knows about it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he knows about it.
yeah, it's
Now,
definitely changed my perspective in that way. It's really
yeah,
been
yeah.
a real gift.
Um, as you know, we're in the bird collision space,
Yes,
and we're a big proponent of, we're about education and conservation, and we're not a company that just needs to sell product and what's the square footage? Here's your price.
yep,
We take our role very seriously, and we've heard from a few people, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but we've heard now I can use the term spark stories
yes,
based on collisions,
absolutely,
moments that are heartbreaking but transformative. And we've seen where all of a sudden people's interest became, they became more involved
yeah,
in nature, in conservation. And we've got a couple questions here, and I was like, what can those stories teach us? And from your perspective, how do these personal stories translate into caring for birds in a bigger way?
absolutely. This is, I think, at the heart of the project. It's great to hear about how people come to birds. But what's really, really, really important is that when we come to care about birds, we become curious about learning about birds,
Mhm,
then we want to do the work to protect them, to
mhm,
do the conservation work, to learn about the individual actions that we can take to ensure that birds are thriving and to go beyond that into learning about how we can take collective action to protect the birds. And when we start that process and that initial spark, what that brings is the beginning of investment. And my dissertation work was on an idea called social investment. And so when we can adopt a social role, we can have kids, we can get married and get a job, all of these things. But if it's not important to our identity, if it's not part of how we define ourselves, we're not always going to necessarily see it as a central part of us, and it's not going to necessarily change us.
right.
when birds become an important part of who we are, then we start to engage in the behaviors that go along with that. And it's not just looking at the birds, it's about
Right.
taking care of the birds. And I think one of the fundamental aspects of that that we learn about early on is window strikes and how to the easy ways to prevent this. We talk about this with our young birder club all the time. We say lights out and cats in, and we talk about how to make our windows safe. And these are simple things that young children understand and that adults can very easily wrap their heads around, but they don't necessarily know what they're seeing. And so, by helping with the education work that you all do, by the awareness work that you and others are doing, that helps us very tangibly see when we see a dead bird by a building, no, it wasn't sick. Now we can know that a collision happened. Now that we can know that action can happen to change that. And I do that on my own campus. So we have a couple of windows that are a bit problematic, and I've talked with people about it. And in some cases, we've gotten some window shades that are drawn now, and we don't have any more problems in those spots. Others maybe need some treatment and conversation with you.
But
And that those small steps can make a huge difference, as we know.
and that's what it is. It's there's so many different things that can be done for the conservation end of it,
Yeah,
which some of them are a little more involved than others, but they're simpler. Things we can do on a daily basis. And then the other end of the spectrum on all this, and I have found this in my career here at Feather Friendly, is that it takes a village.
absolutely.
And I find this space very interesting. And when I say space, the birding space, you and I connected at a conference. We just had a conversation and connected and sort of hit it off and then continued on that conversation. And
Right.
you probably have a ton of stories like that. I have a ton of stories like that. And
Yeah,
you know, we got a lot of media exposure and pats on the back when McCormick Place in Chicago got
right.
treated, which I was the first to say right at the beginning that it takes a village. If it
Mm-hmm.
isn't for all these people interested,
Yep.
all the legwork that was done by Dave Willard at the Chicago Field Museum, Annette Prince with Chicago Bird Collision Monitors, all these other advocacy groups, American Bird Conservancy, all these people, we've all come together with a focus on change.
Yeah,
And, we're so grateful to play a very, very small piece of that. We just happen to be the solution that was chosen. But there was a lot of legwork by a lot of other people for us to get to that stage. So we're very, very
for sure.
grateful. Um, I think we might have answered this one, but the other question I had is, do you see a link between a person's spark bird moment and their motivation to protect birds in nature?
Absolutely. And I think that's where the next step happens is we have the bird curious person, we get them hooked, we spark them, and then we keep getting sparked. We know how the birds just
Right.
keep bringing us in, we keep bringing us in, and then that knowledge deepens and our awareness deepens, and we you got to have your head in the sand if you don't know the huge challenges that are facing our birds and our climate and our
Yeah.
species, and of course the interconnected nature of all of that in the ecological systems. And the birds are showing us that in very explicit ways. And we know that there are absolutely human related causes, but we also know that there is hope and there's stories of hope. And
Mm.
the McCormick is one perfect example of how action can actually matter. And I feel like, especially right now, it feels like there's a lot that we can't do anything about. and our actions maybe don't always feel like they can matter. And birds give us a place where we can do things and we can notice a change and hopefully long term play that out. And I talk to my kids all the time about how when I was young, we didn't see bald eagles and the
Yes.
ospreys were in tremendous decline. And now, there's a bald eagle on every signpost. That's great.
Okay, so I got just a couple more questions for you.
Great.
What do you hope the Sparkbird project grows into over the next few years? And I guess this is a two-parter. Are there new directions you're excited about? Research,
Yes.
outreach, partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal for I'm on sabbatical right now. The goal for the end of my sabbatical, and I'm starting to teach again at the end of August of 2026, is I'd love to be at 1,000 stories. The more
Wow.
stories we have, the better the science. The better the science, the better we can inform our community partners of how to spark other birders. And then that can bring more people to the conversations to help care for the birds. And that's really what it's all about.
Hmm.
So that is certainly the concrete short-term goal for this year. Within that, diversifying our sample. Right now, we're at about 87% white.
Hmm.
As I mentioned, our gender diversity is pretty great, but continuing to make sure that that stays strong, continuing to make sure that we're representing voices of different abilities and disabilities, growing our reach across the BIPOC birding community, which of course is historically marginalized in pretty much every sector and birding not excluded. So finding ways to celebrate those voices and those stories, and maybe taking a step back and letting others lead some of the work with stories. So, working on some grant right now that would bring other people into the conversation so they can take their creativity, whether as a social scientist or as a storyteller or as an artist, and bring that to bear on the stories themselves, creating some resources and tools to make the stories themselves more accessible, creating resources and tools to help other people, empower other people to go and collect the stories. It doesn't just have to be me traveling around giving Sparkbird talks and getting those stories. Other people can do that work. That really creates community when you have a group of
Hmm.
people together sharing their stories. So creating some of those resources. And then really looking long term at what are the most important questions that we can ask to study our birding participants over time. We tried to sort of ask a huge array of questions that colleagues and partners had wanted to ask, and it was pretty clear from participant feedback that that was a little too much. And so finding the right balance, making sure that we're asking the key questions, but not asking too much, but giving the opportunity to give additional data if folks want to. And this balance of any sort of community science of we are asking for people to volunteer, of give their time, give their energy, and how do we calibrate that within the social science realm and making sure that we're working collaboratively across other different research initiatives so that we're not overburdening our birders with questionnaires, and making sure that we're doing that well.
Awesome. So here's my last question, and
Great.
it's probably a perfect follow-up to what you just shared. If someone hasn't shared their
Yes.
Sparkbird story yet, what would you say to encourage them? And how do they go about doing that?
Oh, this is such a good question. I have been absolutely shocked by the number of people who have said to me, "Oh, you don't want my story, it's just A." Or, "I don't really have a spark bird." But that is all critically important data. We don't need just the stories that look like Roger Tory Peterson at age 11 finding
Right.
a one northern flicker. We need every single different way that birders have come to fall in love with birds. We also need the stories of people who maybe wouldn't have thought that the word birder gets to count for them, that they don't count. They're
Yes.
not enough. They only vividly remember a woman who told me, "Oh, I'm not a birder," and then told me about the 20 years of watching a hummingbird family raise generation after
Mm,
generation after generation in her yard and
yeah.
changing the way of that we think about what it means to be a birder. And certainly we can have semantics about what that means, but that for at least for the purposes of the Sparkbird data capture, if you appreciate birds, share your story of how you came to that appreciation.
Right.
We can get into the weeds and the nuances with other questions after that first story of granularity, of variability in birding and what it means to be a birder and play around there. And so, really, anyone and everyone who loves birds should share their story. We're not going anywhere. So, when that time feels right for them, they can just go to our website at www.spark-bird.org, or you can just Google the Sparkbird Project. You click on a button that says share your Sparkbird story. That takes you to the data capture, and you can go from there. At the website, you can also read the over 400 Sparkbird stories we have from other folks. Not everybody decides to share their story openly, just like on an eBird list, you can hide your story, and that can just be for the research purposes. And then we have information on programs and the data itself, the research itself, the questions that we're asking is on the website, as well as our podcast and other stuff.
Fantastic. And we will make sure we add that as a final slide to this
Okay.
video so people can actually see it and write it down, etc. Um, I want to thank you so much for your time, for your insight. It's for me, it's so cool to connect with like-minded people, and we wish you nothing but the best. And we will be staying in touch
Absolutely.
for
And
future opportunities. And um, I'm really interested in doing a deeper dive into the Sparkbird project and um, reading some stories. And I'm challenging myself that I will submit a story for you.
excellent. And we have one story right now in the database that does talk about window collisions. So I've
Oh,
certainly
interesting.
heard others that people have shared with me at programs. So if folks have those stories, submit those stories, and that can be something that can really inform your work that y'all are doing and where that takes folks.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jen.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.